Hello friends, and welcome back to this course titled as Introduction to Indian Writing in English. Friends, we were discussing a very important text, Train to Pakistan by Khushwant Singh. Friends, Train to Pakistan by Khushwant Singh has many aspects of discussion. The list is endless. We cannot limit it to the topics like intermingling of history and literature, which we had already discussed, or the aspect of trauma, which we discussed initially, or the aspect of third person narration, which we discussed in the last class, or the aspect of social structure and cultural understanding, which we are going to discuss today. There are many other ways in which Train to Pakistan can be discussed. We have to understand that this work has a lot of depth, a lot of originality, a lot of characteristics which are undefined. But in all these topics related to Train to Pakistan, which I had already discussed and I will be discussing in this lecture also, I am just trying to give you an idea to identify the various dimensions related to this text, Train to Pakistan. But before discussing today's topic, that is social structure and cultural understanding, let us first talk about the outcome which you are going to learn from this lecture. Through this lecture, you would be able to justify the role of various social structures in the formation of culture. Well, friends, this is a very funny word, culture. It is associated with all of us. If we are an infant, even then we follow a particular kind of culture. Then we become adolescent and learn different kind of culture. Then we become adult with a different kind of culture. And then we become old, learning a different kind of culture from our society or community. On the basis of these cultural classifications, we can understand that there are different social structures. The social structures which are in detail Khushwant Singh is able to establish through this work, Train to Pakistan. Let us try to now understand that how Khushwant Singh is able to make those social structures or create those social structures. And in this way, he is able to, let's say, create a kind of understanding about culture through this text, Train to Pakistan. The author draws a parallel between the unusual summer heat and the change in relations between Hindus, Sikhs and Muslims as a result of partition of India. Well, friends, this is correct. The heat was unusual. Such kind of heat was never faced by Indians or Pakistanis before. Why? Because this heat is not only created due to extreme sunlight, but this heat is created due to the violence, the fire of violence. So, we can say that this summer was very unusual was very, let's say, painful, was very uncomfortable for the local natives of India subcontinent. The lateness of the monsoon season, which typically cools the heat of the summer, correlates with the expansion of the violence, which becomes so unbearable that people flees their homes. Well, friends, if we see somewhere fire is burning, what do we generally do? We try to find some water and put it on the fire so that it calms down. But in this situation in India, the monsoon was delayed. The monsoon here is symbolic. The water of harmony need to be poured on the fire of violence and communal, let's say, disturbance. But the monsoon was delayed, and because of that delay of water, people were killed, people were massacred, people were burnt alive in the migration, in the partition process. So, we can understand that Khushwant Singh, through the imagery of summer or through the symbol of monsoon, is trying to create the ecstasy which this, let's say, this scenario had. The partition resulted in a mass exodus, with Muslims going to Pakistan, their new homeland, and the Sikhs and Hindus claiming India. What kind of claims are these, friends? How can one community claim on the entire nation? The nation belongs to all the citizens, despite of their religion, caste, creed, etc. But the situation here was very critical. Hindus and Sikhs were claiming on India, and Pakistanis were claiming on, let's say, Muslims were claiming on Pakistan, their new homeland. So there was a mass exodus, a kind of, let's say, thought, or let's say a kind of illusionary idea which pervaded everywhere in the air. During this forced separation, the groups into each other, indicating how they share an experience of migration and displacement, despite their insistence on living as enemies. Well, friends, this is right, that the groups were running into each other. They were trying to kill each other. And this kind of, let's say, experience of migration and experience of displacement, it was never seen before in the history of the world. The people who were neighbors earlier, the people who were friends earlier, the people who were living together from past many generations, overnight they became enemy, and they expected the other community to leave immediately their houses, their lands, their property, and migrate to the other country. Mano Majra is an oasis, or a space in which there is relief from the constant hostilities. Well, in the beginning of the stories, in this story, friend, we saw that Mano Majra is not influenced from the violence, and thus it is considered as the oasis, as a dream place for the people who love harmony and peace. Mano Majra's 3 buildings, the home of the money lender Lala Ramlal, a Sikh temple, and a mosque, symbolize the presence of the 3 religious groups. Well, friends, When we talk about the religious buildings, whether it is a mosque or temple or any other kind of building, we consider it as a symbol of communal harmony. We consider it as a symbol of enlightenment. We consider it as a symbol of peace. When we look at these three buildings, let's say one belonged to the richest person of this village. He is a money lender, Lala Ram Lal, who is killed in the beginning of the story. Then we had a Sikh temple, and then we had a mosque, suggesting that the people from all three religions, Hindu, Muslim and Sikhs, were living very peacefully in this village. The division of the land also shows that the village's caste system is based on religious membership. This is right, friends. The land was also divided in the village according to the caste to which a person belongs. We had seen it in our villages also, that the people of one community had cultivating fields in one particular area. Then another community had fields in another area, and there is some community with no land with them, but their houses are located at some outer area of the village. And in this way, there is a proper system maintained in these village areas related to these communities and their lifestyle. Ram Lal is in minority, but his wealth depends on his role as a lender. Well, Hindus were in minority in this village, friends. They were very few. But Lala Ram Lal, he was a rich person in that village. Why? Because he was a money lender. He used to give money to the people who needed it, and then expected some kind of, let's say, interest on that money. And which is why his family was very prosperous. The Muslims occupy the lowest social position in this village, for they own no land, but without their assistance, the Sikhs could not maintain their farms. So friends, in that village, the Muslims were not very rich, but they were peasants working in the fields of Sikhs. Sikhs were the major land, let's say, owners in that village. They were the owners of the fields, and the Muslims were working in those fields. The Muslims were not the owners, but they had interdependency on each other for their survival. The social structure is hierarchical, but it is also built on codependency of cultural understanding. Well, friends, which is why I always say that culture is something which varies from one place to another place. In this village, the villagers had created a different kind of culture. The Sikhs has a particular role to play, the Hindus had a particular role to play, the Muslims had a particular role to play, and in this way, this cultural understanding of codependency, dependency of one community over another community, is the representative of the hierarchical social structure of this village. Every village has a hierarchy, and we had seen it in our community also. Even if we are working at, let's say, in some university, in some office, in some institution, we have to follow a hierarchy level. That hierarchy level includes, expect some kind of self-control, expect some kind of discipline, expect some kind of, let's say, dependency on each other. And in this way, we can say that that ideal hierarchy level was maintained in this village, Manomajra. Most of the villagers are illiterate. Also, they rely on the arrival and departure of the trains to determine their day. Well, when this process of migration starts happening, the illiterate villagers, they were also thinking of the train in which they had to migrate to a new place. But friends, they were not aware that what is going to happen with them after migration. They were determining their day of migration, relocation, but they don't know. Their futures were blank. Their futures were dark, and they were completely confused and terrified. The trains are one of the few aspects of modernity in social structure that is accessible to them. Well, friends, those people, we are talking about 1947. Those people do not have cars. They do not have any other mode of transportation, but they were dependent on this train, let's say, facility, which was created in India by Britishers. And they don't know where this train is going to take them, but the train was a symbol of modernity in their life. The train was something which was scientific, which was novel for them, about which they do not understand much. The only thing they know is that they have to sit in that train and migrate to a new place. After sitting in that train, the train will act just like their owner. The train is going to throw them to a new place where they have to begin everything with new, let's say, effort. The robbers intend to frame Jagga with the bangles. Now there is one incident in the beginning, friends, about the murder of Lala Ramlal. There are few robbers who enter into his house and kills him, and these people were against Jagga. Jagga was one of the history sheeter of the village. So they throw some bangles into the house of Jagga at night as a, let's say, symbol of, let's say, that Jagga had killed Lala Ramlal. So when the police comes in the morning, it catches Jagga, it claimed Jagga for the murder of Lala Ramlal. This is the first mention of Nooran in the narrative, who is not named but instead defined in relation to her father and Jagga and recognized only for her supposedly seductive looks. Friends, there is a character Nooran in the story, and as females were not considered as very educated and very brainly in that society, Nooran is also portrayed as a lady with a seductive looks, fulfill the sensual desires of some male in the village. There is an ironic parallel between the arrival of the goods train and robbers' intention to loot the home of the wealthiest family in the town. Well, friends, just like train comes and leaves, the robbers also entered into the house of Lala Ramlal. They looted the entire money and wealth, and then they ran away. Just like a train arrives at one place, some people comes out of the train, some people goes into the train, and the train departs. In the same way, the robbers also departed from Lala Ramlal's house after killing him and looting all the money and jewelry and wealth which was there in his house. The women are the protectors of the home, but they are vulnerable during the confrontation with the robbers. Well, in that scene, when these robbers enter into the house of Lala Ramlal, the women were vulnerable because they were dependent on males. They were not powerful. They cannot do anything except crying, suggesting that in that cultural, let's say, concept, in that social structure, the females, the women had to do nothing except crying and beating about the bush. They were not free to take any action. They were not free to take any violent action against the males in the society. Singh's description of the women crouching and the boy who clings to the elder and the older women who begs reinforces their helplessness and contrasts with the men's forceful action of hammering, demanding and taking the old women's handful of jewelry. Now all these incidents, they suggest that women were powerless, just like children. They cannot help males in such situations, and thus the robbers were able to do what they wanted to do in the house of Lala Ram Lal. The robbers have a ruthless disregard for life, which Singh amplifies by illustrating their ill treatment of women and children. Now, when these robbers are portrayed in this novel, friends, we saw that they had no humanity. They had no mercy on the children and females of the house, suggesting that in that time also, in 1947, such kind of brutal criminals were there in these remote villages. This scene contradicts Hukum Chand's later comment about Muslims being disrespectful to women. This is right, friends. There is one statement by Hukum Chand, who belonged to the police department. He says that Muslims are disrespectful to women. But are those robbers Muslims? No. But even then, they were disrespectful to women and children, suggesting that overgeneralization by Hukum Chand about Muslim religion was inappropriate. The robbers whom we learn are Sikh are equally violent. So, the Sikhs were also violent, the Muslims were also violent, and same applies to Hindus in that community. Like I told you earlier also, friends, that the animal instinct lies within the mind of every person. We have to keep that animal instinct into control and act like a gentleman in the society. Ram Lal hides to protect himself and his money, leaving the women and children to fend for themselves. Well, Ram Lal, males must protect the females and the children. But in that scene, friends, we saw that Ram Lal was trying to protect himself. He left the women and children to fight with the robbers. He expected them to take all the money, but do not kill anyone in the family. But he was not able to defend himself and protect his family. Though he begs the crew not to kill anyone, his choice to hide and abandon an old woman and a small boy to armed robbers is a subtle indication of his greed. Lala Ram Lal in that society, in that social structure, friends, is a symbol of, let's say, greed, but timidness. He had no guts to express, let's say, his ideas firmly in front of the robbers. And which is why he left a small boy and an old woman in front of the robbers and he hid himself. When the robbers kill the only Hindu in Mano Majra as well as the only men with the wealth to provide the villagers with money, they disrupt the power dynamics which has long existed. Well, this person, Ram Lal, was the only Hindu in the village and he used to lend money to the villagers. So the economic structure, the financial structure of the village was well, let's say, created by this person, and with the, let's say, murder of this person, that economic conflict starts raising in the village. There is a complete mismanagement in the social structure of that village, Mano Majra, and which is why we can say that the power dynamics was disturbed by these, let's say, robbers. In the end, a gang plans to murder all the people living in the train to Pakistan. Well, there is also one incident, friends, when a gang at the end decides to kill all the Muslims who had to travel to, let's say, Pakistan. Jagat Singh or Jagga, a Sikh boy who is in love with the Muslim girl Nooran, is also on this train. Now, Jagat Singh, there is a love story in this novel, friends. There is a Muslim girl Nooran, and that Nooran loves Jagat Singh. Jagat Singh is a Sikh boy, he loves Nooran. So, there is a, let's say, love angle also which is visible in the story. Jagat Singh sacrifices his life in order to save the Muslims. Friends, at the end of the story, I told you that there is a mob of Sikh boys who put a rope in front of the train so that when the train will stuck into that rope, the Muslims who are sitting at the roof of this train, they will fall down, and 500 to 600 Muslims will be killed at a time. But their plan is failed by Jagat Singh. Why? Because Jagat Singh wanted to protect Nooran, who was also travelling through this train, and thus he cut the rope at the end, and which is why Nooran and all the Muslims safely reached to the, let's say, reach to the Muslim camps. Novel suggests ordinary people's suffering who had no say in it and were just asked to comply to this act of foregrounding. Well, this is right, friends. Ordinary people have their personal sufferings, and these personal sufferings are, let's say, generalized with the help of their acts. The story also shows how reluctant the Muslims were in moving to Pakistan. Muslims did not want to move to Pakistan. They wanted to live in India only. But they had no choice. So they had to move there. Nooran wanted to stay with Jagat Singh because she loved him, but she had no choice. So Jagat Singh gave a sacrifice for Nooran. During the cutting of that rope, he falls on, let's say, in the way of the train. The train passes above him, and then he is cut into pieces from the wheels of the train. So his death is a sacrifice of Sikhs for the Muslims. So he is the representative of communal harmony in that social structure, or suggesting the Sikh culture of helping others. So with this, I hope that you understand that the story and this incident of cutting the rope is conveying a message of communal harmony between Sikhs and Muslims, which was created by Jagat Singh at the end of the story. So that is all for today. Thank you for listening.